Hey everybody, my name is Stephen Barson. I'm one of the composers of Star Wars Jedi Survivor, and today we are going to be talking to some of the people who were involved in making the score and the people who were integral to the sound of the soundtrack and how great it sounds. We're thrilled today to be joined by one of the legends of the London recording scene, Skaila Kanga, who are probably the most well-known harpist, probably in the world, potentially. Skaila, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us.
Great pleasure.
So something I didn't know about you until I was researching a little about you for this was that that you grew up in Mumbai and the piano was originally your first instrument, not the harp. So how did the harp come to be your main focus?
Well, my father was a violinist, and the reason that we moved here was that he got a job in the London Philharmonic Orchestra in 1950. And I moved here as a child with my mum, and we brought the piano actually from India with us on the boat. That's a little aside. But the thing is that I was a pianist for a long time, and then I actually did try to learn the violin and failed miserably. So I got a junior exhibition for Saturday morning school at the Academy when I was 12, and studied. They always wanted a second instrument, and obviously having failed on the violin, I thought I don't want to play a woodwind instrument, so I took singing up as the second instrument, and then that. In those days, it wasn't enough to just do piano and singing. They wanted us to learn a second instrument. And this is in the Saturday school. So I used to go to all these concerts with my dad playing in the orchestras. And the only woman was the harpist. And so I thought, I could have a go at that. And so after my GCSEs at 16, I started the harp when I was nearly 17 years old. And I studied privately because obviously I was very much more behind than on the piano. And I was too elementary to do it at senior academy, so I kept on with my lessons with the harpist of the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, Tina Bonifacio, and played the piano and carried on singing in the seniors. And then after my second year, there was no degree then, Stephen. It was just a performance course. And so I got this phone call from the fixer, the contractor of the London Philharmonic Orchestra, saying, I hear you play the harp. Would you like to do Swan Lake in Southsea for 6 weeks?
Wow.
And I went, I'd only been learning about a year and a half. About 2.5 years, actually. And I thought, well, I could give it a go. I know how the music goes. Because, I pick up a lot of things by ear. And it's just a matter of pressing the right pedals and going, finding the right strings. So I actually did this. And then I was just about to go back to the Academy for my third and final year in performance course when the Festival Ballet rang up and said, we need a harpist for the next tour for 6 months. Would you like it? And I thought, perhaps I could just try this. So I just went to the principal of the academy and said, excuse me, Sir Thomas. I don't think he knew who I was. And I said, I've got a job now, so I'll be leaving. And that's how it started.
That's incredible.
And I was 20.
So you're now Professor Emerita at the very same institution at the Royal Academy. And for many years, you were head of harp there. You've toured around the world, sat on numerous competition juries. You're a prolific composer yourself for the harp and for other instruments. But particularly with the harp, what harp music excites you? Is there anything that you listen to or you gravitate to?
Well, I think, I'm a sort of global musician, if you like. And the harp has sort of come to me slightly sideways because I still regard myself as a pianist who plays the harp, even after all these years.
Wow.
And, I've been to numerous harp recitals and stuff like that. But what excites me most is going to piano recitals still. And I think that if the harp hadn't come up the way it had, I would have loved to be a piano accompanist because I did a lot of that in my teenage youth. And I accompanied my father and his students, and really the violin and the piano repertoire is in my blood.
Yeah.
And I always also think that it's helped me so much in the way I play the harp, because I always bring what I've learned from my singing, my brief experience on the violin and my piano keyboard experience to whatever I play on the harp.
So is that something you would think be quite useful? Because a lot of composers, when they start out to write for the harp, are completely terrified of it, frankly. It seems like it should be so sort of piano music. Would you find that sort of having sort of, the piano background might help you understand composers' sort of trepidation and sort of be able to see the part and go like, that's not really a great harp part, but I know what you were thinking?
Exactly. I think as a session musician, the idea is that you are the vehicle for the composer's ideas. And you have to go into their sound world, and you have to feel by empathy what they want and what they're after. They might not be able to completely be literate on the harp as far as that's concerned, but if you try to envisage what they have in their imagination, then you're on the right track. That's the piano and the harmony and all that, and the improvisation and the sight reading, all those basic musical skills that I've sort of gathered on the way. I use them literally every time I look at a new session score.
So the harp, I think, is an instrument that a lot of composers are pretty scared to write for, in the sense of like we don't want to necessarily underuse it. It's rather like having a Ferrari and driving it sort of 10 miles an hour down the motorway. What qualities do you look for in a great harp part?
Well, the parts that really stand out are the ones that give the sound of the harp space to ring. Because basically it's a resonant instrument. It doesn't have a damper pedal. Anything that you need to stop the sound, you need to damp it with your own hands. And so the actual sort of resonance of the instrument and the overhang of the notes needs a bit of space. So if it's thickly written, if there's a lot of repetitions and you're constantly putting your hands on the string and damping the sound, it's less idiomatic than if you write less and allow it to ring. And then that's got that special sort of bloom that no other instrument has in the orchestra, So that's really what I think, that to use it as a special tone is the way ahead, really.
And in a similar vein, I think it's one of those things also when composers write harp parts, we're often composers are not totally sure what they should be writing. And so I actually asked quite a few people online on various forums. I said like what the sort of the question they would most like to ask you. And the number one choice by far was, would you like to see pedal markings in your scores, or do you appreciate a composer who has sort of taken the effort to sort of research it and figure it out and find out how to do it, or do you just prefer to do it yourself? What do you like to see in a harp part?
The problem of not having any is that you think that composer hasn't thought about what's possible. So if you do go through the process of writing in the pedals, they might not be in the right place, but it means that the composer has thought that you've actually only got 2 feet and you've actually got only a certain amount of time to change from one thing to another. And with me, I always prepare all the session parts as much as I can beforehand, so I will go and check all that. But if you have no pedal marks, then sometimes you think, well, actually, he's just written a piano part and it's hoping that it'll work. So I think that the other thing is that you do need to always write every single note of a scale, of a run, if in any of the glissandos. Don't allow the harpist to make it up. I mean, I can make it up by listening to it and see if it's right, but I know that Sibelius has these pedal pictures and these pedal programs, and what I do find in a lot of session parts is that they apply the program, and all these little patterns of pedal pictures come up, and sometimes there'll be a pedal picture over 2 beats rest, in which you have to change 7 pedals, and that's all very well.
Dancing.
So what I've now that doesn't bother me anymore now, because what you have to know is that you're in a recording studio. You're not doing a live concert, so therefore you can use the technology.
Yep.
So if you understand the technology and you understand that you're in a booth most of the time, and so therefore you've got complete isolation, and the orchestra will do at least 2 or 3 or 4 takes, you can drop in. You can actually do a few passes and cover the whole part, but that takes a lot of arranging on my part to know exactly what to leave out.
Right.
But that's the idea. But a little go of the pedals from a composer's point of view, I think, shows that at least you've thought about the feet.
So interesting you bring up the booth. Is it something you prefer, or do you prefer to be in the room with the orchestra?
Well, I think a lot of composers and mix engineers want total control over the harp. The advantage, there are a few advantages. You can hear yourself very well. You can tune up very well. The disadvantage is, if you're not experienced in booth life, is that you're completely isolated and you are at the behest of what the engineer feeds you in the headphones. Now, after many years of doing this and being in the booth for probably about 20 years now, I've convinced the 2 main studios to give me a cue mix, which means that I can do my own headphone balance, which has actually transformed my life, because then I can decide from cue to cue what I need to hear. And that means that really I can feel as if I'm in the room. And also then I can drop in. So because if I'm in the room, it has to be with everything. So that some of the impossible changes are much less likely to come off, basically.
So the harp is something where I kind of understand to a degree that there's each instrument is quite different to another, or the harps have a personality to them, maybe.
Well, only as much.
Yeah,
only as much as there are different makes of instruments, and no one harpist is going to sound like another, just like the violin. They've got their own sound. So, I mean, basically, most of us use either an American harp or a German harp. And they're pretty sort of similar, except that the German harps have this fantastic warmth to them and breadth to them, and that's the ones I use. Those are the ones I use.
It's also the instrument that probably requires the most preparation. I mean, maybe with the exception of the piano, but do you have like a session ritual?
Well, first of all, now on days of email, I can always, even if it's the day before, it's helpful, because then I come, with the travelling and the parking and the moving of the harp and everything, I'm ready with the music. Obviously, there are additional cues and stuff and alterations, but that can be taken care of. But the ritual really is to get in there, get my position in, and allow the harp to settle down for about 10 minutes, and then check the tuning. And I basically use the same instrument for most of my session work, because everybody loves that particular instrument. And so therefore I will check the tuning. And that tuning is another issue, of course, because you're not in the orchestra outside, so they don't hear you. And I've always felt that through the headphones, for some electronic reason, I always hear the orchestra a bit sharp. I don't know whether that's something to do with the electrics or the digital or whatever it is. So I have to be very careful that I don't go with that sharpness and that I always tune no higher than 441 and stick to it. And then hopefully, if they do hear me, with some movement part or other, it'll work. And also the prelays, you see, you can't be miles sharper than the prelays.
So your soundtrack resume is probably, arguably certainly one of the longest of any musician on the planet. You've worked with, Jerry Goldsmith, you've worked with John Williams, you've worked with virtually every sort of composer of significance.
I actually worked with Bernard Herrmann. Did you know that?
I did not know that. That's what session was that for?
Well, I was trying to desperately find out what the title of that film was, and I think it's called Sisters.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And it was almost at the end of his life,
incredible.
early 70s, very early 70s. And it was at Denham. And I'd literally, in my early 20s. And obviously, we were all in there together. And it was in the days of the big screen and the clock and the sync points. And you do the same cue over and over again until the conductor hits the right points. And I have a little story about Bernard Herrmann, if you'd like me to tell it to you.
Of course.
And that is that we did the run through, and it was a sort of one in a bar waltz type thing, and there was quite a lot of movement with the quavers and the eighth notes, etc. And I thought, I played that quite well, And then it came to the film, and we were at, as I say, Denham. So they go rolling. So the projectors at the back of the room projected the film onto the big screen, and there he was. And of course, he rehearsed it a little slow. And so he sort of speeded it up, and being keen and following the conductor, I speeded it up with him. And of course, he didn't realise that I was going to go with him. So it was too fast, because he was going too fast. So he slammed down the baton and shouted over to me and said, "What do you think? You're a composer?" And we had to stop and start again. And then I realised, that was the first time in my life that I realised, watch the conductor, but don't always rely on that to think where you're going to play. Just go with your ears and not your eyes. And that was a massive lesson when I was early 20, and it stood me in good stead, I have to say, for many decades.
So with that, actually, there's an interesting point of like the recording off click track. Would you prefer one or the other? Prefer without it, or
it's the worst nightmare in a booth when they say, "Can we just have a bit of on the stick, play this cue so that we can get the sound up?" So until probably about a year and a half ago, when I sat in the booth, either booth here at Abbey Road or at Ayr, what I saw on the screen was a quarter of a second late.
That's not helpful.
And including the conductor screen.
Wow.
And it's really tortuous. I always say to the engineer, please ignore what I'm doing off click, because I'm guessing. And often the orchestra doesn't want to hear the harp because there's too many glisses and it's too, But then when they need to hear the harp, I'm not there. So often when I'm in the room, a lot of the woodwind and people say, "Oh, it's wonderful to hear you. We can tune to you." And, it's a sort of fixed pitch thing as well. But off the click in a booth is like torture.
Well, so speaking of Abbey Road, you've been in this building probably more than people who've worked here.
67 was my first session in number 3 upstairs.
Wow.
And I can't remember what it was. All I knew, it was upstairs. I looked in an old diary and found it was upstairs. But I have to say, according to that last remark that I made, Abbey Road and Ayr now have fixed the delay.
Wow, that's excellent to hear.
Yeah,
it's not something I ever knew about, and I've done many sessions where you were doing that, and I had no idea.
Oh, it was torture, but I kept telling them, please do something. And Abbey Road did something, and now it's not a quarter of a second behind, it's an eighth of a second behind, which you can sort of cope with. And then when I went to Ayr, I said, well, Abbey Road have done it, why can't you? And, they did something as well. And actually that really transformed the booth situation.
I mean, there obviously so much has been done in these studios, and so many, musical luminaries have been in and out, and you've played with many of them. But what does this studio mean for you? I mean, is it still a place that gives you a buzz when you come in?
Oh, yes, it's like a second home, really. It really is. And the thing about playing symphonically because I've done a lot of orchestral work and a lot of symphony works, not just sessions. And when you are in that room and you're playing in a symphony orchestra, the time lag is a problem, You don't get that on sessions because you have headphones and that. But if you're playing something big work or something like that, it really takes a bit of management because of that delay, So in a way, I suppose I'm in my comfort zone with my click track and my booth and my headphone, I say headphone because it's only one headphone, because otherwise you'd be bashing the other one on the side of your harp,
So really, I suppose as a final question, when you're not recording, what do you like to do outside of the music world? What's your
Outside of the music world?
Yeah.
Well, I like to see my family. And I have a feeling, I do like to bake and do my gardening and sewing, but don't have much time really, because I do quite a lot of teaching as well, especially recently now. I have been at the academy teaching for 35 years, but just before COVID, I had a little gap because some of my best students had graduated, and I thought, I need a little break. So I didn't do much there, only just classes for 4 years. And then I saw them all in their COVID bedrooms with their microphones and this, and I thought, oh no, I can't sit in the garden just enjoying myself. I've just got to do something to help them get back. Because it was a big thing. It took a year and a half out of a lot of young people's lives. And the morale was so low, But now, of course, that's now exploded and we've got a massive department. So I do love to be around the young people and, help them.
So I also hear one of your students recently became the new principal harp of the BBC Symphony Orchestra.
Correct, yes, that's one of them. I was actually, when I was coming for this interview, I decided to count up the number of students that I taught, one-to-one, not just classes, because there are a bit many more, but I've actually taught 67 people.
Goodness me.
And they're not just from here, they're all from all over the world, and a lot of them have wonderful jobs and do all sorts of different things. But I always encourage them to have the variety outlook, not just go down one route, because that's what's kept me going. The fact that I love my sessions. I'm absolutely obsessed with sessions. And I think the reason for that is because every day is new. And also you get to know composers like you, Stephen, and how you write, and I find that fascinating. And you tap into their imagination, and I think that's really exciting. I'm sure the symphonic life is also exciting, but I find this more rewarding from my point of view.
Skaila, as always, just a pleasure to be with you. Thank you so much for taking the time.
It's a great pleasure to see you again, Stephen. Thank you.